Hi everyone. This happened several years ago, and for a long time I stopped talking about it altogether. Not because it didn't matter anymore, because people tend to respond with hindsight instead of empathy. They ask what you should have done without understanding how fear rewires your brain in the moment. But I think people hearing this will understand. So here it is. At the time, I was living in a second-floor apartment in Raleigh, North Carolina. It was a quiet area, the kind of place where neighbors waved politely but kept to themselves. I worked as a medical assistant in a small clinic, and my schedule usually had me home by early evening. That afternoon, I came home just after 5 p.m. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and let it close behind me with a dull click. I tossed my purse on the counter, set my phone beside it, and kicked off my shoes. I didn't bother locking the door, something I'd done countless times before without a second thought. My partner was supposed to be home within the hour away. That habit ended that day. I walked down the hallway toward the bedroom, sorting laundry and half listening to the hum of the traffic outside. I was in the middle of hanging up clothes when I had heard the front door open. I smiled instinctively and called out, "Hey, I'm back here." There was no response. That uneasy feeling, the one you can't quite explain, settled in immediately. I stepped out of the bedroom and into the living room. Someone was standing near the kitchen counter. He wasn't masked. He wasn't holding anything. He was just there. A man that I had never seen before, older than me, watching me silently like I had surprised him. For a brief foolish moment, I wondered if he had the wrong apartment. That thought vanished when he didn't apologize or move. I raised my voice and I told him immediately that he needed to leave. I tried to sound confident, tried to make myself bigger than I felt. He didn't react. Instead, he reached down and picked up my phone, then my wallet, then my keys. One by one, calmly, like he had all the time in the world. That was when panic really took over. The only other way I could contact anyone was my laptop sitting on the desk by the window. I rushed toward it, grabbed it, and ran past him toward the bathroom. I slammed the door shut and locked it just as I heard footsteps behind me. Within seconds, the handle rattled. I ran into the closet, locked that door too, and dropped to the floor. My hands were shaking so badly I almost couldn't open the laptop. I logged into the first messaging app I could think of and sent frantic messages to my partner, begging him to call the police. He replied quickly. He said help was on the way. He said that he was leaving work also. I sat there, knees pulled into my chest, listening. The bathroom door opened. Footsteps moved closer. The closet door shook violently, then stopped. I didn't scream. I didn't cry out. I didn't fight. I was frozen completely. Utterly frozen, convinced that if the door gave way, that would be the end. Now, usually when people hear this part, they often ask why I didn't do more. I don't have a satisfying answer. Fear doesn't always look like action. Sometimes it looks like stillness. The noises moved away. I heard things breaking, cabinets opening, glass shattering. Time stretched and warped until I had no idea how long I'd been there. I messaged my mother. She lived states away. I told her I loved her. I asked her to keep replying even if I couldn't respond right away. I didn't want to be alone. Eventually, the front door opened again, this time followed by shouting. I recognized my partner's voice. Moments later, everything blurred. I remember the intruder being restrained. I remember sitting on the floor, shaking uncontrollably. I remember the police lights through the windows. The officers arrived way later than I expected, though I know fear distorts time. They took the man away, and I got my belongings back. I answered questions mechanically. As one officer was leaving, he told me that I should always lock my door. At the time, it felt like blame. Later, I just understood it was experience speaking. The incident itself lasted less than an hour. The aftermath lasted years. Even after we moved to a quieter town, to a safer building, to a place with only one entrance, I couldn't sleep. Every sound felt threatening. Every night felt like I was waiting for something terrible to just happen again. Eventually, I realized that the fear wasn't about where I lived. It was about how helpless I still felt. So I did something uncomfortable. I walked into a self-defense studio and signed up. At first, I stayed quiet. I stood in the back. I avoided attention. But over time, slowly and deliberately, I rebuilt something I thought I'd lost forever. My confidence, control, trust in myself. I've trained for years now. The person I was in that closet still exists, but she no longer defines me. I don't judge her anymore. She survived the only way she knew how, and now I know more. If you've experienced something like this and you still feel haunted by it, I want you to know you're not weak and you're not broken. Healing doesn't look the same for everyone, and there's no timeline for it. Thank you all for listening. If sharing this helps even one person feel less alone, then it was worth it. Stay safe.
This happened right after college, when I had just rented a small apartment on my own. Like most people starting out, I didn't have much money, so I was looking for the cheapest place I could find. The apartment was really old, and there was this strange, musty smell that never seemed to go away, but I didn't really have a choice. For the first few weeks, everything was fine, nothing unusual. But then, things started happening. One day, I was sitting on the toilet when suddenly, I couldn't breathe. It felt like the air was being sucked out of the room. I panicked and scrambled out of the bathroom, and the moment I got out, it stopped. I thought maybe there was something wrong with the ventilation, or maybe there just wasn't enough oxygen in there. But everything seemed normal, so I brushed it off, figuring maybe I was just stressed. But it kept happening, and it only ever happened when I was in the bathroom. One day, I was taking a shower when I suddenly heard a noise from the toilet. I turned around and saw the water inside it violently shaking, like someone had just stirred it. But I hadn't touched anything. There was no reason for it to move like that. That's when I started to feel really uneasy. There were days when the bathroom suddenly smelled like something burning, like squid being grilled. Other times, it smelled like blood or something rotting. And on those days, there would always be this sticky liquid on the floor. The toilet paper would be soaked for no reason, and sometimes there were splashes of water on the walls. At that point, I started to think something was seriously wrong with that bathroom, like it was cursed. So eventually, I asked around, found a psychic, and contacted him. A few days later, he came to my apartment. The moment he stepped into the bathroom, his expression changed, like he had just seen something terrible. Then he slowly looked down at the toilet. I followed his gaze, and the water inside had turned red. The psychic flushed it immediately. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I thought maybe I was hallucinating, but the psychic looked straight at me and nodded. After a moment, he told me that this apartment used to be a hideout for a criminal gang, and that in this bathroom there had been multiple cases of torture and murder. Right then, out of nowhere, he suddenly dropped to his knees and screamed, "Please, just let me go!" And then it was like something forced his head down into the toilet. In an instant, his face was shoved into the water. He started thrashing violently. I rushed over to help him, trying to pull him back, but his head felt impossibly heavy, like something was holding him down with incredible force. After struggling for what felt like forever, I finally managed to pull him out. He was coughing, gasping, clearly in pain. Then he told me he couldn't handle this alone, that he would have to bring his master to perform a proper exorcism, and that it would cost a lot. I'll be honest, part of me wondered if he was just trying to scam me, but after everything I had experienced, I didn't know what to think anymore. Even after he left, the strange things in the bathroom didn't stop. One day, while I was showering, I suddenly felt something slam into my ankle. I lost my balance and fell hard onto the floor. With the soap making everything slippery, I hit the tiles so hard. The pain was immediate and intense. I crawled out of the bathroom, still covered in soap, my whole body shaking. I was terrified, At that point, I couldn't stay there anymore. I moved out as soon as I could, basically running away from that place. I tried to look into what had happened in that apartment in the past, but I couldn't find anything. After I left, nothing like that ever happened to me again, and I hope it never will. Even now, I sometimes ask myself if what I experienced back then was real, or if it was all just in my head. But when I think back to what I saw with my own eyes, it's hard to convince myself it wasn't real. I ran a small art studio in Oregon. It wasn't anything special, just a quiet space above a row of shops where I mostly taught kids and beginners. Up until then, nothing unusual had ever happened, at least, not until I got that email. One night, I opened a message from someone asking for private lessons. His name was Evan, a guy in his mid-20s. A few days later, he came in for his first lesson. He told me he was a cook and that he had never really drawn before, so I decided to start him off with some basic exercises. I asked him what he wanted to draw the most. He pulled out his phone, showed me a picture of a woman, and said, "I want to draw myself eating her." The moment he said that, I felt a wave of nausea hit me. Maybe it sounds ridiculous, but it wasn't what he said. It was how he said it. The way he looked at me, his tone, his voice. Something about him made my stomach turn instantly. I didn't know what to say. It was just the two of us in the studio, and I realized right away something was seriously wrong with him. I tried to stay calm and said,
"You're here to actually learn how to draw, right?"
He nodded. "Of course. I need to get my face and her face exactly right, as realistic as possible." That was enough for me. I told him I couldn't teach him and asked him to leave. He looked confused, almost offended, and started arguing with me, but after a while, he finally left. I had a pounding headache, and I ended up closing the studio early that day. A few days later, when I came in, I saw a piece of paper lying in front of the door. I picked it up. There was a drawing on it. It was horrifying. A man was tearing into a woman's foot, eating it. The level of detail was disturbing. Exposed bone, blood, everything rendered with unsettling precision. But what shocked me the most was the face of the man in the drawing. It was him, Evan, and then I felt dizzy because the woman in the drawing was me. I dropped the paper and screamed. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. He had taken my photo from online and recreated my face perfectly. What made it even worse was how detailed it was. The thought of him spending hours on it, carefully drawing every part, made my skin crawl. I grabbed my phone to call the police, but my hands were shaking so badly. And at the same time, I wasn't even sure if this was something he could actually be charged for. Either way, the police came. After hearing what happened, they went to see Evan and gave him a serious warning. Thankfully, he never came back to my studio. But that wasn't the end of it. A few months later, I got an email. Without thinking, I opened it and immediately screamed. There was an image attached. It was a drawing of Evan sitting at a table, eating, and on the table was my head. The detail was unbelievable, like it had been done by someone who studied human anatomy extensively. Every muscle, every layer of skin, every vein, drawn in disturbing precision. And underneath it, there was a message. "This is what I always dream about. When I draw things like this and look at them, I feel the happiest and most alive. Evan." I blocked his email immediately and deleted it, but the damage was already done. That experience stayed with me. I ended up deleting everything about me online and moving my studio. Over time, I managed to get back to a normal life. I still teach art, but even now, I still have nightmares. I tried to understand why he was like that, reading about psychology, looking for some kind of explanation, but I never found a clear answer. The only thing I could come up with was that he had some kind of twisted obsession. In psychiatry, it's called paraphilia. Maybe he had urges he couldn't act on in real life, so he expressed them through his drawings. Sometimes, I wonder if he's still out there, doing the same thing. As for me, I just try not to think about him anymore and live my life in peace. So in the middle of the night, I accidentally heard my mom open the front door, and I heard her say,
I haven't seen you in a long time. Come in and sit.
My mom kept talking, but the problem was that it sounded like she was speaking to someone in front of her. However, there were moments when my mom went quiet and no one responded. I asked myself, is my mom talking on the phone? But if she were on the phone, I would have only heard her voice. I had clearly heard the door open. So I asked myself again, who is my mom talking to? That night, I woke up and left my room, intending to see who she was talking to. I went out and immediately entered the kitchen, pretending I needed to use the bathroom. I opened the door and saw my mom talking to someone, but I couldn't see who it was because they were hidden behind a wall, so I could only see my mom. The moment I stepped out, I saw my mom deep in conversation, but there was no one visible in the living room. I stood there for a brief second, completely shocked. Then my mom said,
Oh, and this is my daughter. She's grown so much. Go and introduce yourself.
I was confused and terrified. I told my mom I needed to use the bathroom because I really had to pee. Then I ran inside and locked the door. I stayed there for about 5 minutes when I heard my mom say,
All right, see you again.
Followed by the sound of the door closing. When I opened the bathroom door, I saw that my mom had already gone to bed, so I went straight back to my room. A few days later, I asked my mom about that night, about the person she was talking to. My mom looked confused and said,
What are you talking about?
I tried to remind her, but she insisted it never happened. To this day, my mom has no memory of opening the door for anyone.
The story takes place in a remote area of the UK, but to protect the people involved, I won't say the exact location. My friend Zara, a British Pakistani influencer, had just recently had her second child, and her husband had gone away on a golf holiday, leaving her alone with the 2 children. She was used to being left alone, as her husband often worked away from home too, and would often go away on vacation with his friends, leaving her alone to take care of the children. It was a stormy October night and there was lots of thunder, so it was pretty noisy. She started to feel uncomfortable as it was getting dark early and her house is fairly isolated. So all the noise from outside was, well, getting to her. At around 9 p.m., she had just finished a cup of coffee in the kitchen. The children were asleep and Zara was making sure the house was locked up for the night. She went back into the kitchen and she saw that the back door was slightly open. She started to approach it, but then felt very dizzy, stumbling, and she fainted. Zara slowly regained consciousness and sat on a chair in the kitchen. The first thing she was aware of was how heavily she was breathing through her nose. She felt something covering her mouth, and after twisting her lips, she realized it was sticky tape that was sealing her lips. Zara started to panic and tried to talk and shout, but the gag around her mouth was preventing this. She struggled to move as well, as she could feel her hands were taped together behind the chair, and when she looked down, she was duct taped to the chair and her feet were taped together as well. Her hard breathing popped the duct tape covering her mouth in and out. Then the lamp over her head switched on. Standing there before her was a medium-built man with a hood on and a scarf covering his lower face. At this point, Zara was obviously petrified and was mainly concerned for her 2 children sleeping upstairs. The man then said,
I won't hurt you, but do you keep money in the house?
Zara mumbled a no against the tape. The man had a large bag which he had filled with items such as Dubai jewelry from around the house. The next thing he said sent a chill up Zara's back.
Don't worry, your kids are still asleep.
He then went to leave through the back kitchen door, and before exiting turned and said,
I just want you to know I'm sorry for this.
Then he left. Zara struggled for a few minutes and then eventually freed her mouth from the tape by twisting her mouth and biting on the tape. She immediately ran to check on her children who had both slept through the entire ordeal. She phoned the police and the man was eventually apprehended later that week. As mentioned, Zara has an online presence, so the man was aware of this and was aware that she was often left alone. He admitted to gaining entry to the back door and drugged her coffee, which explains why she fainted. The burglar said that he had lost his business and was in a desperate situation with the state of the economy, but that he didn't wish to harm anyone. Zara bears a strong resemblance to Kim Kardashian, and the fact that she's a micro-influencer is likely what gave him this idea, as a similar situation happened with Kim Kardashian just a few years earlier. Zara is a very strong, feisty young woman, so she did eventually learn to live with the situation. However, it's not something you can ever fully recover from. She couldn't help but feel sorry for the man who did this, but the feeling she had when she was in that position is something she'll never forget.